My son's funeral wasn't even over when my wife slipped away from the gravesite. The cemetery was still echoing with the sound of dirt hitting the coffin when I caught sight of her disappearing down the path, her black dress dragging across the grass, her head bowed low as if she were still mourning. But 2 hours later, that illusion shattered. I saw her again, only this time she wasn't grieving. She was laughing. Laughing in the passenger seat of a black SUV with tinted windows, a man's arm draped casually across the steering wheel, his profile sharp against the glare of the streetlights. I froze on the sidewalk, my tie still strangling me from the service, my hands trembling as I realized she had chosen this moment, to show me who she really was. The world around me tilted. It felt as if my whole neighborhood was watching me from behind curtains. I could imagine them whispering, "There's the useless father. He couldn't even keep his family together after losing his son." My in-laws didn't even bother to hide their disdain. At the reception, they pulled me aside, their voices low but sharp as knives. "You couldn't protect him. You couldn't even be a provider. What good are you now?" Every word sank like a hook into my chest. I bit down hard, swallowing the rage that threatened to spill out, but I'll never forget their eyes, cold, judgmental, already erasing me from their family tree. The next morning, when I thought grief couldn't crush me any further, a knock rattled the front door. A courier in a suit handed me a thick envelope, his expression stiff, rehearsed, as though he had delivered these kinds of betrayals before. My hands shook as I tore it open, my eyes darting across the neat legal font. Divorce papers. She hadn't even waited a week. My wife, no, the woman who had once sworn to love me until death, was demanding her freedom while still wearing the black funeral dress I had buried our child in. And hidden in those papers, between clauses and conditions, was a line that made my knees buckle. It was about the life insurance, my son's policy, a clause I never signed off on, a clause that gave her everything. I stumbled back against the wall, the words blurring together as my heart hammered against my ribs. The room felt too small, the air too thick. Outside, the church bells rang, long and heavy, as if tolling not just for my son, but for me too. I collapsed into the chair by the window, staring blankly at the streets where children played, their laughter slicing through my hollow chest. My grief twisted into something else, something darker. This wasn't mourning anymore. This was war. For the rest of the day, I sat in silence. Neighbors came by with casseroles and hollow condolences, their voices dripping with pity. Every card they dropped on my counter was another dagger. "You'll get through this. Stay strong. He's in a better place." They didn't know that my son's death wasn't the only thing I was grieving. I was losing my wife, my dignity, my identity, all at once. The walls of my home echoed with emptiness, with memories of bedtime stories, baseball gloves, and birthday candles now extinguished. And somewhere out there, my wife was smiling in another man's arms, planning her next move. By nightfall, I couldn't sleep. I wandered the house aimlessly, touching the edges of picture frames, running my fingers over my son's baseball cap, inhaling the faint scent of his shampoo that still lingered in the bathroom. I replayed every moment in my head. My wife's quick exit at the funeral, her laughter in that SUV, the cruel smirk of my in-laws, the divorce papers, the insurance clause. It was too neat, too fast, too cold. It wasn't just betrayal, it was orchestration. At exactly midnight, when the house was swallowed in darkness and the silence became unbearable, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. The vibration was sharp, startling, like a wasp trapped in a jar. I reached for it with trembling hands, expecting another empty condolence. But it wasn't from anyone I knew. The number was blocked. The message was just one sentence, glowing in the pale light of the screen. "She's not just cheating. She's planning something bigger. Tonight." My stomach twisted. My chest tightened. Suddenly, the grief wasn't the only weight crushing me. It was fear. Fear of what I didn't yet know. Fear that the nightmare had only begun. And as I sat there in the dark, phone clenched in my fist, I realized I had a choice. I could crumble completely, let them erase me, or I could fight. For my son's memory, for the truth, for myself. And in that moment, I made a vow. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to burn every one of their secrets to the ground. The address in the anonymous text led me to a forgotten edge of town, a place where even the streetlights seemed ashamed to shine. The storage facility loomed like a row of silent coffins, each unit padlocked, each door a secret no one was meant to open. My heart pounded as I stepped out of the car. The air was damp, the kind of damp that carried whispers. I double-checked the numbers scrawled in the text, Unit 43B. My palms were slick when I slid the key into the lock. For a second, I almost turned back, almost convinced myself this was just grief eating me alive. But the steel door screeched upward, and in that moment, I stepped into another reality. The unit wasn't dusty or neglected. It was organized. Almost curated. Shelves of designer handbags gleamed under the dim fluorescent light, tags still hanging like trophies. A neat row of shoeboxes sat stacked to the ceiling, each one labeled in her handwriting. My wife's handwriting. The same handwriting that had once left me love notes on the fridge now mocked me in ink, across boxes filled with luxuries I could never have afforded. The smell hit next. Expensive perfume, leather, paper, and beneath it all, the faint metallic tang of cash. I moved deeper inside, my shoes crunching against discarded packaging and torn receipts. On a folding table, I found the first set of documents. Bank statements. Dozens of them. All in names I didn't recognize. The balances made my stomach flip, numbers I had never seen in my own account. Transfers listed as donations or consulting fees. And then the one that nearly buckled my knees. $420,000 wired to an overseas account, Panama. My fingers tightened around the papers. This wasn't grief. This was theft on a scale I couldn't even process. Then came the photographs. Hundreds of them, or what was left of them. My son's face sliced into confetti dumped in a cardboard box like trash. Each shredded strip felt like a stab wound. I fell to my knees, pulling at the scraps, trying desperately to piece his smile back together. And then, by some twisted mercy, I found one intact. Taped to the back of a small safe, hidden like a cruel treasure, was a single photo of him. His face smudged with dirt, his gap-toothed grin frozen in time. I pressed it against my chest, my throat burning. Whoever had left it there wanted me to see it. Wanted me to feel this pain. My hands shook as I pried open the safe. Inside were envelopes thick with documents, legal contracts, insurance policies, false IDs. And at the very bottom, a folded medical report. I unfolded it carefully, almost afraid of what it might reveal. The words blurred at first through my tears, but as the sentences sharpened into focus, my world split in half. The report contradicted everything I had been told about my son's death. Toxicology results didn't match. Time of death was marked as inconclusive. A doctor had scribbled a note in the margin, requesting further analysis, details inconsistent with official ruling. My legs gave out. I sank to the floor, clutching the papers as if holding on to them would stop me from falling apart. My wife hadn't just abandoned me. She hadn't just stolen. She had buried the truth about our son under layers of forged signatures and financial trickery. And my in-laws, my in-laws, had been funneling money through a charity fund in my son's name, parading as grieving grandparents while laundering sympathy donations into their own pockets. The grief that had hollowed me out only hours before now hardened into rage. It was deliberate, planned. Every condolence meal, every pitiful pat on the back had been camouflage. I wasn't just a widower grieving his child. I was the mark in a long con, a patsy in a cruel family empire built on my son's memory. I stuffed the documents into my jacket, bank statements, receipts, the medical report, anything I could grab without making a sound. My breathing was ragged, my pulse roaring in my ears. I had to get out. I had to think. But then, headlights. The narrow beam cut across the unit's thin metal walls, casting long shadows that stretched over the floor. A car door slammed. Gravel crunched under slow, steady footsteps. The voices came next, familiar, sharp, cruel. My wife's low laugh, my in-laws murmuring, and the deep, commanding voice of a man I recognized from the funeral, the stranger in the SUV, the one whose arm she leaned on like he was her salvation. My stomach dropped. They were here, all of them. And as the storage unit door began to rattle and lift, I clutched the papers to my chest, frozen, realizing too late that I hadn't uncovered their secret. I had walked straight into their trap. The metal door rattled up, and in stepped the people I had once called family. My wife first, her face lit with a cruel calm as if grief had never touched her. Behind her, my in-laws, eyes gleaming with superiority, the kind that comes from believing they had finally broken me. And then the man from the SUV, broad-shouldered, cold-eyed, his hand brushing the edge of his jacket where I knew a weapon waited. Ex-cop, private security. The kind of man paid not for protection, but for intimidation. I froze in the unit, the papers clutched under my arm like a shield. My wife's lips curved upward, not into the smile I once knew, but into something venomous. "I told you he'd come," she said, her voice dripping with triumph. My in-laws stepped closer, their whispers cutting through the heavy silence. "He's going to sign everything over tonight. Make it quick." A folder appeared in my wife's hand, thick and bound with a clip. She dropped it on the folding table with a slap that echoed against the concrete walls. The ex-cop locked the door behind them, sealing me inside with my executioners. "No one's coming to save you," he muttered. The words sank like ice into my veins. I pretended to tremble, pretended to be the broken man they thought I was. But inside I was burning. They didn't know about the flash drive in my pocket, the one that held every transfer, every forged document, every lie I had found in that safe. They didn't know that the pen in my jacket wasn't just a pen but a recorder, one that could capture every word they were about to say. "Sign it," my wife commanded, sliding the papers toward me. I let my hands shake as I picked them up, scanning the first page. Legal jargon. Transfer of property. Division of assets. But buried deep in the middle in smaller type was the real dagger, a clause that gave them full control of my son's death benefits. Every last cent, the insurance money they had built their empire around. They wanted me erased legally, financially, emotionally, reduced to nothing but a signature on their path to fortune. I forced a sob into my throat, my fingers trembling as if I had surrendered. They leaned closer, convinced they had won. My wife whispered to her mother, "He's finished. He'll crawl away after this." Their arrogance nearly made me smile. They didn't see the fury boiling beneath my skin. I took the pen and scratched my name across the lines. Every stroke recorded, every whisper captured. I signed as if I were bowing to them, while secretly setting the trap they could never escape. But just as the final mark touched the page, the night shattered. Sirens, loud, piercing, screaming from every direction. Red and blue lights painted the corrugated walls, bleeding through the cracks in the unit's door. My wife's head snapped up. The ex-cop cursed under his breath, his hand twitching toward his holster. My in-laws exchanged panicked looks, their confidence unraveling in an instant. The sound grew louder, closer. Tires screeched on gravel. Doors slammed. Voices barked commands outside. I thought for one insane heartbeat that maybe, just maybe, someone had called the police for me. That fate had finally shown mercy. But then I saw the smirk curl back across my wife's lips, sharp and knowing. "They're not here for us," she whispered, her tone chillingly certain. "They're here for you." The ex-cop grinned, stepping closer, his shadow swallowing mine. "Anonymous tip," he muttered.
"They'll find you here with all the evidence."
Papers, money, fake IDs, a perfect setup. By morning, you'll be the monster who staged his own son's death for profit. My stomach twisted. The walls seemed to close in, heavy and suffocating. I realized the trap wasn't just about erasing me, it was about making me the villain of my son's story. My wife's betrayal wasn't complete until the world despised me, until the law itself crushed me under its weight. The sirens cut suddenly, replaced by the crunch of boots and the metallic jangle of keys against the unit doors. A megaphone voice rang out, "Step outside! Hands where we can see them!" My in-laws backed away, rehearsed horror etched onto their faces. My wife pressed a tearless handkerchief to her eyes, preparing to play the grieving widow. The ex-cop reached for me, ready to drag me into the light as their sacrifice. And all the while, my pen sat quietly in my pocket, recording every word they'd said. The door began to rise, blinding light spilling in, shadows scattering across the floor. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I gripped the table edge, caught between fight and flight, between the truth I held and the lies they were about to unleash. And as the door opened fully, the last thought that struck me like a hammer was this. The police weren't here to save me. They were here to bury me alive. The morning after the ambush, I woke not to silence, but to the sound of my name exploding across every news channel. My phone buzzed with alerts, neighbors whispered outside my window, and reporters were already camped on my street. The headline ran like wildfire: charity scandal tied to child's death. My wife's face, my wife's smiling, public charitable mask, flashed across the TV beside mine. The anchor narrating how donations meant for grieving parents had vanished into thin air. The police had raided the storage unit, but the money was gone, the safe cleaned out before anyone could seize it. All that remained were traces, papers, false IDs, scraps of a life hidden in shadows. And just like that, the story was no longer mine. It belonged to the world. Court was scheduled the very next day. They moved fast when scandal threatened to choke an entire community. I walked through the courthouse doors alone, the weight of the world pressing on my shoulders. No lawyer stood at my side. I couldn't afford one. I had no allies, no one I trusted enough to help me. Just the evidence I had collected, the flash drive, the receipts, the medical report, and most importantly, the pen that had recorded every word spoken inside that storage unit. When I stepped into the courtroom, they were already there. My wife, radiant in diamonds that glittered like they were mocking me under the lights. My in-laws, wrapped in tailored designer suits, faces composed in masks of smug serenity. And sitting in the row behind them, the man from the SUV, her lover, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes burning holes through me. They looked like winners, like royalty presiding over a commoner's execution. As the bailiff called for order, their smiles widened. I felt their confidence radiating across the room. To them, this was just a formality. They had the narrative. They had the money. They had the masks polished to perfection. They believed I was already finished. But then the judge entered, a stern figure whose gavel struck like a thunderclap. He ordered them to the stand. My wife rose first, her black dress clinging like a costume designed for sympathy. She raised her right hand, swearing to tell the truth, and for the first time I saw her tremble, not from grief but from calculation. She began with the same speech she'd rehearsed in front of cameras, how I had spiraled into despair after our son's death, how I had mismanaged donations, how I had lashed out in paranoia. She painted herself as the grieving mother, the selfless widow who had tried to pick up the pieces while her husband drowned in madness. My in-laws followed, their testimonies echoing hers, their lies woven with enough detail to seem real. He was unstable, my father-in-law declared. He talked about running away with the money. We tried to help, but he wouldn't listen. My mother-in-law dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue, shaking her head as if I were already a lost cause. Their words landed like nails being hammered into my coffin. I waited, silent, my heart pounding, until the judge turned his gaze to me. "Do you have anything to present, sir?" he asked. My voice shook, but not from fear. From fury. I pulled the pen from my pocket, placed it gently on the table, and pressed play. The courtroom fell into silence, then into gasps. My wife's voice rang through the speakers, sharp and venomous. "He's going to sign everything over tonight. Make it quick." My in-laws' whispers followed. "He's finished. He'll crawl away after this." And then the ex-cop's voice, low and menacing. "Anonymous tip. They'll find you here with all the evidence. By morning, you'll be the monster who staged his own son's death for profit." The sound of their own voices filled the courtroom like a storm, impossible to deny, undeniable proof of the conspiracy. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked like machine guns. My wife's face drained of color. My in-laws clutched at each other, their rehearsed tears replaced by shock. Her lover leapt from his seat trying to rush the bench, but the bailiff blocked him, the judge slamming his gavel again and again until order returned. The truth wasn't just a revelation, it was a nuclear bomb. For the first time in months, I felt the weight shift. Eyes turned toward me not with pity or suspicion, but with recognition of the hell I had been forced to endure. The judge's brow furrowed as he leaned forward. "This changes everything," he said, his voice heavy with the authority of justice. My wife opened her mouth to object, but no words came. She was cornered, trapped by the very arrogance that had made her careless. And then, just when I thought I had finally clawed my way out of the abyss, the bailiff approached me with a brown envelope. His expression was unreadable as he placed it in my hands. Confused, I tore it open. Inside was a single photograph, glossy and recent, stamped with a date from only 2 weeks ago. It was my son. Not a ghost, not a memory. My son. Alive. His smile as real as the air in my lungs, his eyes staring back at me from that photo with the same innocence I had buried. The room spun, my breath caught in my throat. I clutched the picture as if it might vanish if I blinked. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, gasps, chaos. My wife's eyes widened in horror, my in-laws froze in place, and the lover's jaw dropped. Every ounce of strength drained from me as one truth exploded above all others. My son's death had been staged, and now, nothing would ever be the same. The photograph trembled in my hands, its edges damp from my sweat. The timestamp, 2 weeks ago, glared back at me like a cruel taunt. My mind spun in a whirlpool of disbelief and rage. My son wasn't dead. He had been hidden. Hidden like stolen treasure, pawned as leverage in a scheme so monstrous it mocked every tear I had shed. The death certificate, the funeral, the grave, it was all a performance. A grotesque theater staged to rob me of money, dignity, and blood. On the back of the photo, scrawled faintly in ink, were GPS coordinates. I recognized the location immediately, the lakeside cabin owned by my in-laws. A place they'd once called their summer retreat. A place suddenly transformed into a prison for my son. My pulse thundered in my ears as I drove through the pre-dawn darkness, headlights carving narrow beams into the mist. Each mile I traveled felt like walking deeper into hell. By the time I reached the cabin, dawn had begun to unfurl across the horizon, the lake blanketed in fog that curled upward like smoke from a battlefield. The air was heavy with dew, but beneath it was another scent, smoke from a fire inside, the faint hum of voices. I crept closer, every muscle in my body coiled tight, and then, like a sound from a dream, I heard it. A child's laugh. Light, innocent, unmistakable. My son. My knees nearly buckled, the world tilting beneath me as the sound filled every hollow place in my chest. For months I had mourned his silence, and now, here he was, alive, giggling like he had never been gone. Tears blurred my vision as I pressed closer to the door, but then came another voice, low and cruel. The man from the SUV. "He'll never find out," he whispered, his words slithering into the room like poison. My hands clenched into fists. They had stolen my child, stolen my life, and now they were laughing about it. I pushed the door open slowly, recording every second with the device hidden in my jacket. The smell of burning wood and stale liquor rushed into my lungs. And there he was, my son, sitting cross-legged on the floor with toy cars scattered around him, his cheeks flushed from play. For a moment, time froze. I could only stare at him, drinking in every detail, every ounce of life I thought had been stolen. My throat burned as I whispered his name. His head shot up, his eyes widening, and then he ran. He ran straight into my arms, his small body colliding with mine with such force it nearly knocked me to the ground. I clutched him tightly, burying my face in his hair, inhaling the sweet, innocent scent of shampoo and childhood. My tears soaked his shirt as I whispered over and over, "I've got you. I've got you. You're safe." Behind us, a gasp. My wife. She had been standing in the kitchen, a mug in her hand, her face frozen in horror. The mug slipped, shattered against the wooden floor, coffee pooling at her feet. She took a step forward, lips parting to speak, but no words came. Only shock. Only the dawning realization that her empire of lies had collapsed, and then the sound of boots. The cabin door burst open. Police flooded the room, weapons drawn, their shouts echoing against the wooden beams. My wife's lover lunged for me, but an officer tackled him to the ground, cuffing him as he cursed and thrashed. My in-laws stumbled out from a back room, their robes askew, faces pale as death itself. The police dragged them forward, their wrists bound, their cries drowned by the crackle of radios. For once, I didn't move. I didn't fight. I just held my son while the storm raged around us. This wasn't chaos. It was justice long overdue, and for the first time in months, I wasn't the victim. I was the witness. By noon, the scene had shifted to the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters screamed questions into the air, microphones thrust toward me as if I could answer the unanswerable. Insurance fraud, kidnapping, false death certificates. The charges piled higher and higher until the very weight of them crushed the family that had tried to erase me. My wife, her lover, and my in-laws were led out in cuffs, their screams lost beneath the roar of the crowd. And there I stood. My son's small hand gripping mine, grounding me in the storm. Every flash of the cameras was a reminder that the world finally saw the truth. That I hadn't failed him. That he had survived, and so had I. But the final twist was still to come. From the sea of flashing cameras and angry voices, a figure stepped forward. A woman, familiar yet long absent. My son's godmother. She had vanished after the funeral, claiming grief too heavy to bear. But now I saw the truth in her eyes, the risk she had taken, the burden she had carried. She was the anonymous texter, the shadow who had guided me through the labyrinth of lies. Without a word, she pressed a small flash drive into my hand. "Play it," she whispered. That night, when the reporters were gone and my son finally slept in his own bed, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. The screen flickered and a video played. My wife, sitting in a dim room, speaking into a phone she thought was private. Her voice cracked through the speakers like a blade. We did it all. The insurance. The charity. The death certificate. He'll never see his son again. I sat there in the dark, tears on my face, rage and relief burning through me in equal measure. This was the end. The final nail in their coffin. The proof the world needed, the proof I had bled for. I closed the laptop, looked down the hall at my son's sleeping form, and whispered a vow into the silence. They had tried to erase me, to destroy me, to bury me under lies. But in the end, it was their own betrayal that burned them alive. Fade to black,